Hey guys, Senior Auntie here. How's life? Now on this channel, Senior Auntie Uncut, I wanted to start a little thing where I review all the films that I've seen in the past month. Just a few short little reviews of all the movies that I've seen in the past month. Let me know if you've seen any of these and what you think of them down in the comments section below. So the first film, let's start off with the most recent one I watched yesterday, is The Fountain by Darren Aronofsky, starring Hugh Jackman and Rachel Weisz. Now this film kind of really shouldn't be on a list like this. It deserves its own expansive review really. It's quite a deep film and I'm still digesting it. I first became aware of it through its soundtrack. I already heard the soundtrack and the music in the film is amazing. And then I checked out the film, and what it's about basically is Hugh Jackman plays a scientist whose wife is dying of a brain tumor. And he's desperately trying to find a cure. And it's linked to the idea of perhaps living forever, if such a thing can be achieved medically. Now, Rachel Weisz's character, the wife, she's writing a book called The Fountain. Now, in that book, which we see visualized, Hugh Jackman plays a character in medieval France who has a queen played by Weisz, and she's tasked him with finding something that will save the queen and save Spain from the Inquisitors. And there's a third storyline where Hugh Jackman is floating around in space, going upwards, presumably into the heavens, and he's with a big tree, which may be a kind of visual metaphor for his wife, and there's things going on there. So it's quite a layered film, there's a lot going on. I think it's open to multiple interpretations, one of which could be that the only real thing that's happening is the cancer storyline, and the thing set in medieval Spain is just the story, and the thing with bold Jackman in space is something that's going on in his head, his way of kind of reconciling with his wife's condition. The medieval Spain stuff is her stuff, what's in her head, what she wrote. The future stuff is what's in his head, his way of dealing with this, and the middle storyline, the present day storyline, is what's actually happening. Or maybe you could take the interpretation that the future storyline is actually real, that Jackman did indeed find the cure, hence why he's still alive, young and fit in the future. And taking into account the medieval Spain storyline, maybe there's something going on with parallel timelines, the past affecting the future, all of this kind of stuff. And the movie really deals with death, obviously, morality, immorality, the inevitability of death, life after death, accepting death, reconciling with it. It's got amazing music, as I already said, and the visuals were really interesting. Again, I'm not quite sure what to make of it just yet, but at the very least it made me think, it made me ponder. I found it thematically quite rich and quite a spiritual film. The next film I watched was Pale Rider, written, directed and starring Clint Eastwood, a movie he made in 1985 in which he plays a cowboy who arrives to protect some villagers from a greedy mining company. Now, the first film that comes to mind when you think of Pale Rider, aside from Shane, it's kind of an unofficial remake of Shane, I think, is Clint Eastwood's High Plains Drifter, because they're both very similar films, a mysterious cowboy played by Eastwood coming from outside and defending a village from some bad guys. So the connection there is obvious and has to really be made. And when you compare the two, I have to say High Plains Drifter is the superior film. It has that kind of 70s gritty feel. It's also much more of a spooky film. It's different. It's scary. There's supernatural elements out there and you're not quite sure what to make of this mysterious man. And is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? And some of the stuff in that film is quite shocking. Pale Rider, in comparison, feels a lot more mainstream, feels a lot more tame. If it was made before High Plains Drifter, I might say that High Plains Drifter takes what Pale Rider did and does it better. It amplifies it. But with Pale Rider coming 10 years after High Plains Drifter, it does kind of feel like ground Eastwood has already treaded. He did say in an interview that the rider himself is actually a ghost, and that's something very similar to what was going on in High Plains Drifter, so I kind of don't really see the point. But if you take it on its own, Pale Rider is still a good movie. I had a great time with it. I thought it was really well shot. Visually it was great. Eastwood was great. It was his first Western in like 10 years, and it would be his first Western for 10 years because the next one he would make, if I remember correctly, was his last one, Unforgiven, the anti-Western. So it sits quite nicely in his filmography as a solid Eastwood outing, and a nice little 80s update for Shane. The next two films on my list are The Raven and The Terror, both directed by Roger Corman in the 1960s. Now, for those who don't know, Corman, who is perhaps the most famous B-movie producer, in the 60s he made a series of kind of gothic, spooky, low-budget films with really cheap sets, films he made in a short amount of time, often based on Edgar Allan Poe poems. I've seen quite a few of these, and a lot of them star Vincent Price, as The Raven does. Now, in The Raven, which is a very light film, it's a comedy, a sorcerer who has been turned into a raven seeks the help of another magician to get revenge on the guy who turned him into a raven. The guy who's doing the helping is played by Vincent Price, the guy who was turned into the raven is played by Peter Lorre, and the villain of this film is played by Boris Karloff. Three staple names of the horror genre, and all three of them were on really great form. Lorre was really funny in this movie. I heard that he ad-libbed a lot of the lines that he did, which kind of threw Price and Karloff. Karloff actually got really irritated by this apparently, whereas Price kind of managed to roll with it. It's not a heavy film by any means. It's light, it's comical. A lot of the humour still holds up today because it's carried by the acting. And these guys were really good. Jack Nicholson's in it in a really small role as well. He plays Laurie's son, and Vincent Price, Laurie and Jack Nicholson and a girl, they head over to Karloff's castle, a bit of shenanigans ensues, and there's a bit of a showdown between the two main magicians at the end. And you'd think that, it would kind of look stupid, the effects in today's day and age, and sure, it does go on for a little bit too long, but it was a nice climax, and it is a film worth watching. Now, The Terror is quite interesting because apparently just after Corman made The Raven, he immediately, using the same sets and everything, ever the efficient director, he shot The Terror in 4 days, and they just wrote the script quick as they could. They had Karloff, they had Nicholson, and they came up with a movie about a French soldier who gets lost and finds some old hag in the woods, and she leads him to a castle where Karloff is the guy in charge. And so Corman shot the bulk of the movie in those 4 days, and the B-unit footage he gave to some up-and-coming smaller directors, one of whom was Francis Ford Coppola, who would have, of course, eventually direct films like The Godfather and Apocalypse Now. Now, with that knowledge in mind, The Terror is a very interesting watch. You always do have to bear in mind that it was shot over 4 days and they made it really quickly, because it does have problems. There's a lot of scenes of characters walking to and fro these long corridors and spooky castles. It feels like the film is trying to long it out to justify a kind of theatrical runtime. There are things that don't make sense. There's scenes that don't flow very well. A character might be staring this way and in the next shot they're staring that way. Again, like I said, you have to bear in mind it's shot over 4 days, and then it becomes an interesting film to watch in an experimental fashion. I thought it was okay. If The Raven is a solid 7 out of 10, then The Terror is a 6. Story-wise, it's kind of let down by a really ridiculous plot twist at the end, which makes no sense and had no real reason to exist. The film was fine without it. The next film I watched is also a Corman one, but very different. This one is from 1962 and it's called The Intruder. This film is apparently the last time Corman was ever made a film with a message. Because it failed financially, he thought to himself, right, I'm just going to make films to entertain people. And then came the kind of period where he made these kind of gothic, spooky horror films in the 60s. The Intruder stars William Shatner as a social reformer. He rallies the white community of a southern town against the idea of integration, as now black students are allowed in white schools. He plays on their prejudices, he tries to manipulate people, he manufactures scenarios so the two colours are kind of pitted against each other. He of course represents groups that are against the idea of integration. I thought this was a very good film. It was quite timeless in the sense that the things that you see in it, you could pick that up and put it in any kind of scenario, any kind of time period, even here in the UK in 2023. It's a cliche to say a film is still relevant today, but The Intruder kind of is. It's a really good, lesser known film on the subject of race and racism. Watching Shatner just kind of play people against each other was interesting to watch. It felt realistic. Well, except the ending. The ending was a little bit too Hollywoody for my taste. Basically, the town kind of rallies against this black kid who is accused of raping a white girl. The only reason she even claims this is because her father was threatened by William Shatner's character, her father being one of the more decent men in the film. Now, there's a lot of tension, there's a lot of aggression, the people are surrounding this black guy, and at the last minute, the truth gets proven, and Shatner's character tries to maintain that aggression, maintain that hold on the people, but they all kind of see that it was all a farce, that he was manipulating them, and they kind of slowly disperse and walk away, and he loses the power that he had. I don't mean to sound grim, but I would have probably preferred it, and I think the film's ending would have been more gut-wrenching and more impactful had they murdered the black kid, had they lynched him like it looked like they were going to before they were stopped. And then the truth is revealed, when it's too late to do anything about it. That would have been more harrowing, I think. But even still, it's a good film, worth watching. I gave it an 8 out of 10. I thought it was really good, and it does hold up. The next film on my list is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. This is the new one that was released in cinemas recently. I went with my kids to watch it the first time they've been in the cinema. They had a great time with it. And as an adult, I also had a great time with it. It's got an interesting visual style. It's a bit different. It has that nice kind of New York punk underbelly feel, which is quite essential with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I grew up watching the 90s cartoons, and I'm quite familiar with the lore, so to speak. And I really enjoyed it. I had a good time with it. I think adults will appreciate some of the dialogue and the jokes that fly over the kids' head. And it's quite straight-laced. You know, there's no political correctness, there's no propaganda. I thought maybe, one of the turtles would be a woman or transgender or something like that. But it was just, straight up. The turtles were likable, they were played by real teenagers, and you could feel that across the screen, even in the voice. The Master Splinter is played by Jackie Chan. I haven't seen him around in a while, and he was very good. He brought a lot of humour to Master Splinter. And the film has an interesting villain in Superfly, played by Ice Cube, and Superfly is literally a superfly. It has, for a kid's film, interesting things to say about morality, because the mutants are all kind of shunned by society, and a group of them, led by Superfly, decide to wipe out humanity. They feel that's the only way they will be accepted. And obviously, Master Splinter comes from a similar school of thought, because he's also been shunned by society. But when he sees that there are some good people in the world, he changes his views. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles already know this, and so while initially they become friends with Superfly and his team, they end up having to try and convince the guys not to murder all the humans, and that there are good people out there. So, good action, a good message for the kids. It had some interesting musical choices. I thought it was solid. 7 out of 10. The next film on my list was Whoever Slew Auntie. This is a film made in 1972. I just found it on some TV channel that shows older movies. It's about a demented widow lures unsuspecting children into her mansion in a bizarre Hansel and Gretel twist. I mean, that's kind of what it's about. I mean, that is a bit of a red herring. So basically, in the first scene, we see this woman and she's reading a lullaby to her child. We can't see the child's face. She's in her little cot or whatever. And when the woman walks away, the camera moves and we see that it was actually a dead body in there. And then the film starts. So already we're kind of thinking, whoa, what was that? Clearly this woman is messed up. Did she kill the child, or did the child die of natural causes and she can't handle it? And, what's going on here? And there's a local school who 2 orphan children are a part of. And this school has this thing where every Christmas some kids are chosen to go to this woman's house, and they get some presents and luxuries, and they get to eat and party and whatnot. And the idea is that the woman, because obviously she's lost her child many years back, she kind of gets some sense of fulfillment from this. Now these 2 orphans, they read the book Hansel and Gretel, so they're familiar with that. And the film is kind of playing on this idea, because the lady, she becomes attracted to the young girl, naturally, because she had a young girl who died. But the boy is suspicious. He thinks that, she's being nice to her because she wants to keep her around, fatten her up, and then maybe eat her, as per the story. Whereas it might simply be that this woman is, mentally unsound. She's looking for help. She's been abused and betrayed in other ways that the film shows. And she just wants a bit of love, wants to replicate what she had with her daughter. That's another way of looking at it. And the film plays with this idea. It doesn't really confirm to you what's going on What was actually in the woman's head? Was she trying to eat the girl, or was she trying to have a relationship similar to what she had with her daughter? She wants her to stay with her, not go back to the boarding school. She doesn't like the older child, the boy. Is it because he's suspicious and he knows what she's up to, or is it because he's just a bit of an asshole? I like this movie. I like the aesthetic of it. I like the look of it, that kind of old, kind of haunted house feel. I like the fact that it's a kind of sick, twisted version of Hansel and Gretel. And I like the fact that it's open to interpretation. In my own personal opinion, I think the woman, she was being genuine, she was being sincere. She did get more batty and demented as the film went on, but that's understandable because of what was happening to her. The next film I watched is Outlaw King, that was released on Netflix in 2018. The plot summary goes, a true David and Goliath story of how the 14th century Scottish outlaw king, Robert the Bruce, used cunning and bravery to defeat the much larger and better equipped occupying English army. I don't know much of the history about this. I don't know how much of this film is true or not, but as a war movie, as a film following a plucky small army facing off a tyrannical, oppressive, much larger dominating force, I really enjoyed this film. The visuals were gorgeous. It was a stunning looking movie. The battle sequence at the end was brilliant. There was a scene in the beginning with a big massive catapult, and I wish they used that again in the film, but they didn't, and it looks so real. There's a few really long takes. The acting from everyone is on point. I'm surprised that this film didn't really get that great reviews when it was first released. Everything that you see on screen feels good, feels organic, feels real. There was one part, for example, where a guy is being hung and somebody stabs him and cuts him across his chest, and you see all his insides spilling out. And I rewinded it several times. I was thinking, how did they do that? It looks so real. And that goes with practically everything in this film. I really don't see what the low ratings were about. I thought it was a solid movie. Yeah, I guess you could say story-wise, maybe it does feel a bit rushed. There's a lot of things going on. Perhaps it would have benefited from being a 10-episode series, something like that, just to give it a bit more time to breathe. But as a 2-hour film, it is a solid movie. It's a solid period film that feels gritty, down to earth, brutal, uncompromising, but at the same time is elegantly made from a visual perspective. The next film on my list is Naked Lunch by David Cronenberg. I like Cronenberg's movies. I've seen a few of them here and there, like The Brood and The Fly. I've seen a few of his more recent films when he kind of reinvented himself as a director of drama movies like Eastern Promises, but I'm not really that knowledgeable about Cronenberg. I haven't seen enough of his films just yet. And Naked Lunch is one of the weirdest films I've ever seen. That's all I can say. It was interesting. Again, just like The Fountain, it makes you think. It's not a film that lays everything out there for you, and apparently you need to read the book to really understand it, and even the book is even more confusing because you have to read about the life of the person who wrote the book in order to truly understand what's going on. So the movie is about as follows. After developing an addiction to this substance he uses to kill bugs, an exterminator accidentally kills his wife and becomes involved in a secret government plot being orchestrated by giant bugs in a port town in North Africa. Now that does not do justice to how balmy this film is. Well shot, evocative, and it has the usual kind of creature features that Cronenberg was known for back in the days. But story-wise, it's difficult to understand what's going on. There's a lot of weird things that happen. I mean, throughout half of this film, this guy's typewriter turns into a bug and starts talking to him. There's a scene where a human ass grows out of the typewriter. There's just so much funky things going on. And the guy is addicted to the substance he uses to kill bugs. He sniffs it himself. And so it may be that what's happening isn't actually that crazy, but what we're seeing is from obviously his mind, his mental state, where everything is kind of ooh-ah because he's on drugs. I watched it with the missus and we had fun theorizing about what was going on, what was the meaning behind the film, what was really happening in certain scenes here and there. I thought, Total Recall style, the film struck a nice balance between all the government plot, conspiracies and CIA and all that kind of stuff being real, and it all being part of his own imagination playing games with him because of the substances abuse that he's doing. I can't say it's my favourite movie ever made, but it's It's twisted and it's weird enough for it to be watchable, and that weirdness keeps you engaged. I think maybe there's an element where you kind of keep going with it because you think, right, at the end of the film, everything is going to be explained, but that doesn't really happen. So you're left sitting there wondering, just what the hell did I just watch? But if you really think about it, if you do a bit of research, you can piece things together, and it is worth watching, I have to say. The next and final film on my list is Sabrina, directed by Billy Wilder. Wilder is one of my favourite film directors. I think this is one of the few films of his that I haven't seen. The outline goes as follows. A playboy becomes interested in the daughter of his family chauffeur, but it's his more serious brother who would be the better man for her. So really the story is that this young girl, who's played by Audrey Hepburn, she's fascinated with this playboy, but he doesn't give her the time of the day. She eventually goes to France to learn how to become a cook, and when she comes back, she's all elegant, and because she's all, she's been living with high society, and she's come back a changed woman. And this time it's him who's infatuated with her. But the family had arranged for him to get married to some woman who's part of a family who's got loads of money, and there's some kind of business deal going on. So with him now infatuated with her, it causes problems for the family. So the brother of this playboy, who's very serious-minded, he's played by Humphrey Bogart, and he's very invested in the family business. He tries to stop this relationship, and when he can see his plan is not working, seeing as though he knows the way his brother works, he tries to slide in there himself and get the girl to fancy him instead, and create a kind of relationship there. So the brother goes back to the woman he was supposed to marry, and then once it's all said and done, Humphrey Bogart can ditch Audrey Hepburn and go back to his business. But along the way, as with often with these kind of films, Bogey develops genuine feelings for her. And so therein kind of lies the jeopardy. Does he choose the business? Does he choose the girl? Then there's the brother factor. And it's all squeezed in a really kind of likable, typical Billy Wilder comedy, and it really works. It was a good film. Sharp, witty dialogue as you'd expect, funny, solid, great characters. Hepburn was mesmerizing. One thing I would say is that Humphrey Bogart has this kind of stoic personality on screen. He's the hard man, he's the cool guy. He has charisma, he has swagger, but he's not really the kind of swashbuckling romantic lead. And it was weird seeing him play a kind of guy who's got this serious front. Yeah, he's great at that. But then genuinely being infatuated with this young girl when initially it's supposed to be fake. I know that's part of the point, that we're not really supposed to know if he has genuine feelings for her or not. But it's a kind of strange role for Bogey to play for those who have seen the kind of films he stars in. And it becomes more evident, more paramount when you realize Cary Grant was supposed to be in the film in Bogey's role. He was the initial choice. Now, Grant would have been way better in the role. I can see it all playing out in my head. He has the charm, the wit, that kind of skip in his step to play this kind of character. And it would have been way more fun and believable to see him play this business-minded person who sees an opportunity with this girl to kind of get rid of her and sort out the family business, but then he kind of develops feelings for her. You could see it all happening with Cary Grant. He would have been perfect. It was the perfect role for him to play. Bogey was miscast, let's be honest. He did well with the role, but it was a different film. It would have been a different film if Cary Grant was in the movie. Bogey sticks out in a way that does make the film memorable, but I think it would have been a better time if Grant was in the role. Still though, this was a good movie. A brilliantly crafted rom-com that gets an 8 out of 10 from me. So there you have it, my first monthly movie review roundup. Have you seen any of these films? Let me know what you think of them down in the comments below, and let me know what you thought of my reviews. I don't tend to do unscripted live face-to-face camera stuff. I kind of get nervous and it makes me seize up, and I always forget what was in my head and I wanted to say. So I'm trying to improve on that. Let me know if there was anything that I could improve on, things you didn't like, and subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching.